For the first 30 minutes or so, our attorney George is going to start a work training session for the board and the public.
All right. As Jordan said, my name is George. Represent the zoning board here, city attorney. So we're going to have a quick presentation for the board and for the public today on the new local law that was adopted by the city council and is effective January 1st, 2024, concerning all electric buildings. The inspiration for the law, it was a state thing. New York adopted the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the CLCPA. Everyone loves acronyms in law. On July 18th, 2019. New Yorkers approved then the Green Amendment subsequent to that on November 1st, 2021. And then subsequent to that, the New York State Climate Action Council adopted a final scoping plan that was December 19th, 2022. And that's to advance New York's national leading climate goals established by the aforementioned CLCPA. So, in New York State, the pending all-electric proposals, you have first the governor's budget proposal. That calls for the installation of fossil fuel equipment and building systems in any new single-family residential building of any height or any new multifamily residential building not more than 3 stories in height. That shall be prohibited on or after December 31st, 2025. So we're still a couple years away from that, but that's something to keep on the radar. The installation of fossil fuel equipment and building systems in any new multifamily residential building more than 3 stories in height or new commercial buildings shall be prohibited on or after December 31st, 2028. So for multifamily residential more than 3 stories or for commercial, so typically larger projects, they're giving them a little extra time. That's 2028. But for single-family residential or multifamily residential buildings less than 3 stories, that's prohibited on or after December 31st, 2025.
So you said new. What about enhanced via building permit?
In retrospect, I don't believe the state has any intention to actually require people to go back and change anything, but when you have new construction, that's when you can then put in requirements to be fossil fuel free and clean energy and green.
Doesn't the city law stipulate that if you do a renovation past a certain percent?
If it's past a certain percent, that I'm not 100% certain. I know that's
I thought they, if it was over 50 or
different
75,
places, yeah.
The city was going to say you had to then.
Yeah, in that
change.
situation, it's a question of what crosses the line of renovation, right? If you're renovating, but you're tearing out everything except the exterior walls, is it really a renovation, right? That's going to be probably municipality to municipality specific, and that's a determination for the building inspector if and when that time comes. Yeah, and the zoning board when it's before you guys.
Yeah. So the law that the city passed a few months, I think it was more than a few months back now, but the law the city passed was that if somebody was to do 75% renovation or more of the home, and they were also changing out the the heating system in the house, they would have to go all electric at that point. So that's a trigger just for the city of Beacon right now, or at least will be starting the first of the year.
In terms of exemptions from the state budget exemptions, there's any exemptions as a state fire prevention or building code council deem appropriate for the purposes of allowing the installation and use of fossil fuel equipment, where such are installed and used for basically 3 things: for generation of emergency backup power in a manufactured home or in a building or part of a building that is used as there's a list of things here: manufacturing facility, commercial food establishment, laboratory, laundromat, hospital, or other medical facility, or critical infrastructure such as backup power for wastewater treatment facilities or crematoriums, things like that. That's an exemption. And where the exemption is permitted, the exemption shall limit to the full extent feasible the use of fossil fuel equipment and building systems to the system and area of the building for which a prohibition on fossil fuel equipment is infeasible. And it shall also require the area or service within a new building where the fossil fuel equipment is installed to be electrification ready. That's looking forward. And to minimize emissions from the fossil fuel equipment and building systems that are allowed to be used, provided that they don't adversely affect the health, safety, security, fire protection, financial considerations, stuff like that. It's not, a financial consideration is not a sufficient basis to determine infeasibility, right? It's not enough to say that this is going to be too expensive, so it's unfeasible. It really has to do with, is it going to affect the health, safety, security, things like that, these core principles. Now, going to more local, February 6, 2023, the City of Beacon City Council introduced a proposed law to create Chapter 106, Article 5 of the City Code. It's entitled All Electric Buildings. This is to require the electrification of new residential and commercial buildings, and as Elaine referred to and Bruce explained, major renovations. This was adopted March 1st, I believe, 2023, so a couple weeks later. The purpose of the law is to establish a local energy code supplement for all new construction and major renovations. And like I said, it's to really go green. It's to really, embrace that movement. It's to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's to mitigate the effect of global climate change to the extent possible. It's to advance a clean energy economy, to promote the public, and this is what we see a lot, the public health, safety, and general welfare. And also to secure the individual's right to a healthy environment as required under the State Green Amendment. The goal is to eliminate what people call obsolete natural gas infrastructure and associated greenhouse gas emissions in new buildings where all electric infrastructure can be most practically integrated. And this is, again, to reduce the environmental and health hazards produced by transportation of natural gas, consumption of natural gas, and anything related to that. That is effective in the City of Beacon starting January 1st, 2024. That's in the local law. Just an FYI, I don't believe E-Codes has been updated yet. I looked at E-Codes. This isn't on E-Codes yet, but it should be shortly coming. The local law is always available. It probably is available on the city's website somewhere, but you could always ask a city clerk or
So it's December 2024? I thought you said earlier 2025.
Though the 2025 was for the state, but in the City of Beacon, it's January 1st, 2024 that it's effective. So, and you'll see why that's relevant to the zoning board in a couple slides, but right now, again, that's for new buildings and major renovations. That's not, I don't think the goal anywhere is to go retroactively and say, well, you have a gas stove, change that out for no reason other than you have a gas stove. But, the authority for this is under New York State Energy Law, Section 11-109. It's, and subject to the requirements of that section, the City of Beacon has the power to promulgate a local energy conservation construction code that is more stringent than the Energy Conservation Construction Code of New York State. So New York State could say you have to do X, Y, and Z. City of Beacon or any municipality could say you have to do X, Y, Z plus A, B, C, D. That's well within their right. The city also has the authority to enact the law based upon Article 1, Section 19 of the state constitution, which guarantees each person's, quote, right to clean air and water and a healthful environment. And we see more and more throughout the country these movements to go green, to clean the environment, have cleaner air, cleaner water, things like that. The City of Beacon is not alone, however. Some anecdotes. In December 2021, New York City Council passed legislation to phase fossil fuels out of new construction starting in 2024. This law means that new buildings, with few exceptions, will be all electric and emit less carbon, all while improving local air quality and making occupants more comfortable. It places an effective ban on fossil fuel systems in new buildings and renovated ones, pushing to make all new buildings completely electric. And this affects everything from how the building is heated to the kind of stoves that will be in apartments, right? I think generally when we think gas versus electric, it's probably HVAC systems, heat, for example, and stoves. That's really what it comes down to. Dryers too, clothing dryers, that's another big one.
Water heaters.
Water heaters as well, yeah. So there's really these key things that everyone thinks of, and places are trying to get out ahead of that and require you to go greener, with whatever side effects that has, whether it's added cost or less efficiency, more efficiency, whatever it is. That's really the desire behind these laws. In New York City, the requirements will be phased in. For example, new quote-unquote low-rise buildings will be required to be electric by 2024, schools by 2025, and larger buildings by 2027. In New York City, the law covers almost all new construction and renovations, with the exception of, again, some manufacturing, hospitals, and restaurants, right? There's certain, obviously, carve-outs for this requirement with the intention that places like hospitals that we see a lot, or manufacturing facilities, might not be feasible, again, for the health, safety, welfare of the community, not necessarily for the economic reasons. Another example is the town and city of Ithaca. They also adopted a similar legislation. There, effective January 1st, 2026, all buildings must be built to have net zero greenhouse gas emissions, and they shall not use fossil fuels for space heating, water heating, or clothes drying, right? Those are some of the things we just mentioned. It also requires that all new buildings constructed in such a way to produce 40% fewer greenhouse gas emissions than New York State code requires, and it requires that new construction be net zero by 2030. This is an overlay to the state energy code, which includes its own efficiency requirements, including lighting, ventilation, other requirements. So that's, again, an example of you have the state overarching goal, but you also have the ability as a municipality to be more stringent, and the city of Ithaca is showing that. Now, being specific to City of Beacon, the law applies to new residential construction, new commercial construction, and major renovations. What it does not apply to is systems for emergency backup power, because if you're out of electricity and your emergency backup is electric-based, you don't have emergency backup. You're out of luck.
Well, once the batteries go dead.
Yeah, once the batteries go dead. So, manufactured homes, buildings specifically designated for occupancy by, we see it again, manufacturing facility, commercial food establishment, laboratory, laundromat, crematorium, hospital, or other medical facility, municipal water and sewer facilities, or any project that receives site plan approval from the planning board prior to June 30th, 2023. We're past that. Today is August 15th, 2023, but we are past that. Major renovations, what is that? A major renovation under the new law is defined as any construction or renovation to an existing structure other than a repair or addition where the work area exceeds, as Bruce said before, 75% of the heated floor area and involves the replacement or new installation of a heating or hot water system. Think a boiler, think a furnace, or other major system of that sort. Changes to ventilation and air conditioning systems are not considered renovations of the heating system. Another thing that stands out on this slide is the exception for any project that receives site plan approval. The purpose of that planning board exemption is to address situations where projects might undergo phased-in development. So that's sort of what the rationale behind that is. But again, being that it's August 15th and we're having this presentation, there's a good chance that however many handful of projects are approved, but going forward now, site plan approval received from today forward, that exemption does not apply. The article also provides requirements and standards that are in addition to and supplement the requirements and standards set forth in the Energy Code and in Chapter 119, which is Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code of our city code. If a requirement of this article is less stringent than that of the Energy Code in effect at the time of application for a building permit, then the more stringent Energy Code requirement shall take precedence. So if you have Energy Code requirement and you have this section requirement, you go with the more stringent one at the time of the building application permit. The city shall enforce this article in addition to the city's enforcement of the Energy Code. Chapter 119, which is the Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code, sets forth the method for administration and enforcement of this article, and it establishes powers, duties, and responsibilities in connection therewith, including penalties and other violations and other remedies for violations of this article. Where an exemption is permitted, the exemption shall limit or require to the fullest extent as determined in the sole discretion of the building inspector to limit the use of fossil fuel equipment and building systems to the system and area of the building for which the prohibition is infeasible, and it shall require the area or service within a new building where fossil fuel equipment and building systems are installed be all electric ready. Again, we saw that from the state, we're seeing that in the city as well. You want to be all electric ready, again, you're always forward thinking. This is the new wave, the new movement kind of deal.
So by all electric ready, you mean you could swap out whatever old systems
And bring in
and bring in something new
that, yeah.
that's
When it
green?
fails or
Yeah.
But the wiring in the building should work and so on.
As far as I understand, yeah, Bruce is going to be the,
He's the arbiter.
I'm not a wires kind of guy. I do
So,
the,
yeah, that would be the intent, it would be, all electric ready. Actually, there's currently provisions today for some things to be, newer homes to be ready for solar systems. So, the city adopted the stretch energy code. So there are provisions within the electrical requirements there that they have to, put in wiring and get ready to put in a car charger. As well as, putting in at least the conduits for the solar system, that may possibly come up in the future. This law would be, something very similar. So if they were to put in, I guess, a fossil fuel, furnace, they would have to have provisions or at least have enough power within the building, with a proper breaker in the box in order to run a heat pump, for some, at that point in time when they switch over.
moving on to the next slide. Again, this is that date that I said before, January 1st, 2024. Effective that date, no building permit application shall be accepted by the building department, and no building permit shall be issued for new construction or of major renovations to residential, commercial, or mixed-use buildings which requires the use of fossil fuels to power any equipment or building systems therein, such as space heating, water heating, cooking, clothes drying. Again, the main things that we think of and that we mentioned already. Also on that same day, January 1st, 2024, any heating or hot water system, such as a boiler, furnace, or other major system, repaired or installed any time after the issuance of a building permit to construct or renovate an existing structure involving 75% or more of the heated floor area, other than a repair or addition, shall be electric. We discussed that, but those are some things to keep in mind, and the important thing is January 1st, 2024, right? So that's in 4 months or so, right? So it is coming up. This is a reality, so to speak. It'll be here before we know it. All plans submitted in connection with any application for new construction, subject to the provisions of the article, must include notes and drawings to show the removal of petroleum tanks and demonstrate that any tank removed was appropriately closed in accordance with state regulations, right? So it's not only, let's see electric, we don't really care about what happens. You also have to have a plan to remove everything safely, because again, it's not a matter of my building is electric going forward, great. It's what about the things that came out of it, right?
Oil tanks.
Yeah, we're looking to protect the environment. We don't want these spills. We don't want any big issues like that. Also, the plans submitted in connection with new construction shall have to have notes and drawings to show the removal of natural gas infrastructure and demonstrate, again, that the natural gas was capped. And any appropriate details shall be noted if such natural gas infrastructure is required to support an emergency backup generator, for example, right? So if you are keeping natural gas around, you have to be able to point that either we cut it off here or it's around, but it's for this limited purpose, right? Again, this is very forward thinking. You don't want to leave a stone unturned. You don't want it to be the fact that cut it off, you don't have to know what I'm doing. You don't have to worry. There's no more gas going to this building. It's a matter of we want to make sure everything's done properly. Everything has to be pointed out. Where relevant to the ZBA is a hardship exemption, right? So any applicant whose building permit application has been denied may apply to the Zoning Board of Appeals for the hardship exemption. This is in an effort to obtain relief from the all-electric buildings requirement. To obtain the certificate of hardship, the applicant must prove the existence of a hardship by establishing that compliance with this article is financially, technically, or physically infeasible. There's 5 points that really, again, apply to the ZBA, and it's in the local law, and just want to go over those quickly so that you guys are aware of it and the public is aware. An applicant whose building permit application has been denied may apply to the ZBA for the hardship exemption. Upon receipt of an application for relief for this hardship exemption, the ZBA shall, within 45 days, hold a public hearing, right? So you get the application to the ZBA, 45 days later, public hearing. Generally, that shouldn't be an issue because we have meetings every month, right? So if you have the application in, you're gonna be within that 30, 31 days. We don't take a month off where then you're rushing to get into that 45-day period. Notice of the public hearing is gonna be the same as every other public hearing, right? You have posting, you have mailing, you have publication, it's gonna be just like that. At the public hearing, the board may hear testimony and entertain the submission of written evidence from the applicant and/or the public. So again, it's similar to what we do every month here. Public gets to speak, the applicant gets to speak. You guys have questions, you ask about it. Now, to obtain the certificate of hardship, the applicant has to prove that there is a hardship. And by doing that, you're establishing that if you were to comply with the requirements of the article, which may be stringent, too stringent for some people, you have to show it's financially, technically, or physically infeasible. Particular examples of what those are, I mean, you could think of plenty, and that's what we're going to see if and when applications for this exemption come before the board.
A non-self-created hardship.
What happened?
Has to be self-created.
Yeah, it has to be non-self-created, and it has to be either I physically cannot do this. Is this going to cost me $20 million to make this building all electric, or there's just there's no power here, or there's not enough power, whatever the case is. Thereafter, the ZBA has to make a decision within 30 days of the conclusion of the hearing. Board's decision shall be in writing, shall state the reasons for granting or denying the application. So again, very similar to what we do here every month anyway. Notwithstanding this general hardship exemption, all new construction and major renovations shall be required to be all electric ready, right? So again, maybe you can't be all electric right now, but be all electric ready for if something changes in a few years, you don't have to now tear down the whole building and go all electric. You have to show that you are ready to receive or to take that step forward, have the clean energy under the city code and under the state regulations. That's the relevance to the ZBA, that's the relevance to the public who, if they are applying for an exemption, will be before the ZBA. That was a super quick overview. Again, this isn't on E-codes right now, but I'm sure it's somewhere on the website, or you could always request it from the city clerk or whatever the case is. You could always search it online under the New York State documents as well. It should be on E-codes shortly, I would imagine. I'm not sure how often E-codes is updated, but it's on there. It will be on there. We've gone over it really quickly. There's a lot of details there. There's a lot of definitions there. But for our purposes, it was a very general overview. Are there any questions on this from the public or from the board here?
I just have one question. What would be a self-created hardship? Can you think of something?
Well, if you bought something assuming you would get a hardship exception, came to us, you bought it, you knew it, to me, that's self-created.
Yeah, and that's something that, it's not like an area variance, for example, or use variance where we have state mandated requirements or considerations to take, factors to take into consideration. But when hearing an application for this hardship exemption, and you're asking, why is this infeasible? It's up to you guys to determine, okay, well, did you, for example, like Monto said, yeah, and maybe there's better examples, I don't know, but did you buy the property assuming that you could come to the ZBA and this was going to be rubber stamped, for example?
Right.
Maybe that's not persuasive enough. As opposed to, I bought the property, it's located somewhere where there's just not enough power to supply to the building right now, right? So those are some different things, and as you probably know from the variances, applications that we get and everything, properties are always unique, right? It's always a case-by-case basis. There's no two properties the same. There's no two cases the same. So it's probably going to be the same thing with the hardship exemption. No two properties the same. No two applications the same. No two rationales are the same. But that's where you hear, you ask the questions, the applicant submits, their application, the public has their say, and we take it case by case. All right? That is it for the hardship exemption, the all-electric building code presentation. With that being said, I think now we will move on to our regular business. This was the first training session we've had in quite some time since Drew left, so I will try to incorporate these going forward as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, George.